Evelyn Hartmore, Lucas Rayner, and Marissa Hartmore seemed like an ordinary family in a quiet American town. But behind closed doors, a dangerous secret was growing, a forbidden bond that would shatter trust, destroy lives, and end in murder. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Cedar Falls Ridge was the kind of town people trusted without question. It sat quietly between long highways and wide cornfields, far from busy cities and loud headlines. Mornings began with the same routines every day. Shops opened on time, children waited for school buses, and neighbors waved without asking personal questions. It was a place where nothing dramatic was expected to happen, and because of that, people rarely looked beneath the surface. Everyone believed they knew each other, but most only knew what was shown. Evelyn Hartmore had lived in Cedar Falls Ridge for more than 3 decades. She arrived as a young woman, built a stable life, and slowly earned respect. She worked in property management and had a reputation for being sharp, disciplined, and emotionally distant. Evelyn liked control. Her home was always clean, her schedule always planned, and her opinions rarely challenged. People described her as strong and dependable, though some quietly said she was cold. Evelyn did not like unpredictability, and she never allowed others to see her weaknesses. Her daughter, Marissa Hartmore, grew up under strict rules. Marissa was different from her mother. She was gentle, emotional, and eager to please. As an adult, she chose a career in nursing, drawn by the idea of helping others. Long shifts and emotional exhaustion became part of her daily life. Despite her effort to build independence, she never fully escaped her mother's shadow. Evelyn remained deeply involved in her life, offering advice that often felt more like commands. Lucas Rayner entered this family as an outsider. He met Marissa during a difficult period in his life. Lucas had charm, but also uncertainty. He moved often in his early years and never settled into a clear direction. His jobs changed frequently, and his confidence shifted with them. When he married Marissa, many believed she was his anchor. To Evelyn, Lucas appeared weak but manageable. She welcomed him, not out of warmth, but out of interest in maintaining influence. After the wedding, Marissa and Lucas settled close to Evelyn's home. The decision seemed practical. It allowed support, family connection, and convenience, but distance that small allowed presence to grow too large. Evelyn became part of their daily rhythm. She offered help with finances, schedules, and responsibilities. Lucas accepted easily. Marissa hesitated but stayed silent. In Cedar Falls Ridge, such closeness was not questioned. Family involvement was normal. Boundaries were rarely discussed. From the outside, the Hartmore-Rayner household looked ordinary. Weekend visits, shared meals, and quiet evenings blended into the town's peaceful image. No arguments spilled into the streets. No loud warnings broke the calm. Yet beneath the routine, pressure slowly built. The town remained quiet, unaware that something fragile was forming inside a family that appeared perfectly stable. No one imagined that the calm streets of Cedar Falls Ridge were standing at the edge of a story that would one day shatter its reputation forever. After the wedding excitement faded, real life settled heavily on Marissa and Lucas. Their small house, once filled with hopeful plans, slowly became a place of unspoken tension. Marissa worked rotating shifts at the regional hospital, often leaving before sunrise and returning late at night. The work drained her physically and emotionally, but she believed stability came from sacrifice. Lucas stayed home more than he expected to. His attempts to secure long-term employment failed repeatedly, each setback quietly damaging his self-worth. Money became the first invisible wall between them. Bills arrived regularly, and savings disappeared faster than planned. Marissa handled most of the financial responsibility, though she rarely complained. Lucas promised improvement, but results never followed. The imbalance created silent resentment. Marissa felt pressure growing on her shoulders, while Lucas felt judged without words. They avoided arguments, choosing silence instead, believing it was safer. Evelyn noticed everything. She watched the strain with careful interest, stepping in when she felt necessary. At first, her involvement appeared helpful. She reviewed budgets, suggested ways to cut expenses, and offered small loans to cover urgent costs. Lucas accepted her guidance readily. He found comfort in her confidence and structure. Unlike Marissa, Evelyn did not expect emotional explanations. She preferred clear decisions, something Lucas increasingly lacked. Marissa began to feel like a guest in her own marriage. Evelyn's opinions shaped daily routines, from grocery choices to long-term planning. Lucas deferred to his mother-in-law more often than to his wife. What started as assistance slowly became authority. Marissa noticed, but struggled to confront it. Years of living under Evelyn's dominance had taught her to avoid conflict. She told herself it was temporary and that things would improve once Lucas found stable work. The emotional distance between husband and wife widened. Conversations became short and practical. Shared dreams were replaced by shared responsibilities. Lucas spent more time at Evelyn's house, sometimes staying late under the excuse of financial discussions or household repairs. Marissa rarely questioned it. Exhaustion made her overlook details that once mattered. She trusted both people in her life, even as she felt increasingly alone. In Cedar Falls Ridge, appearances remained intact. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. Couples faced challenges, families helped each other. Nothing seemed alarming. But inside the marriage, imbalance turned into dependence. Lucas leaned on Evelyn for validation and direction. Marissa carried the weight of the household while slowly losing emotional connection. No explosive fights warned of danger. The tension grew quietly, hidden beneath politeness and routine. As months passed, the pressure hardened into something permanent. Marissa sensed change but could not name it. Lucas felt relief in surrendering control elsewhere. Evelyn maintained her presence without resistance. The marriage continued, but not as a partnership. It became a structure held together by habit rather than trust. Beneath the surface, the foundation was weakening, and none of them recognized how close they were to crossing a line that could never be undone. As time moved forward, the balance inside the family shifted in ways that felt subtle at first. Evelyn and Lucas began sharing more moments that were not necessary but convenient. Simple tasks turned into extended meetings, and ordinary conversations stretched longer than planned. What once revolved around problem-solving slowly transformed into something personal. Their connection grew through shared frustrations, unspoken understanding, and a sense of alliance that excluded Marissa without openly rejecting her. Lucas found something in Evelyn that he felt was missing in his marriage. She listened without emotional weight and offered certainty instead of questions. Her confidence gave him direction, and her approval became something he quietly sought. Evelyn, on the other hand, saw Lucas as someone who depended on her completely. The sense of control she gained through this dependence fed her need for importance. Neither acknowledged what was forming, but both felt the shift. Marissa remained unaware of the depth of this change. Her long hospital shifts consumed her energy. When she came home, she noticed small differences, like inside jokes she did not understand or decisions already made without her input. She assumed these moments were harmless. Exhaustion convinced her that she was overthinking. She trusted her mother and husband, believing betrayal was impossible within her own family. The bond between Evelyn and Lucas strengthened through shared secrets. Financial matters were discussed privately, and plans were made without consulting Marissa. Lucas began turning to Evelyn for advice about personal choices, not just practical ones. She guided him with firmness, shaping his thinking gradually. The line between family support and emotional reliance blurred more each day. What should have remained distant became dangerously close. Neighbors noticed how often Lucas was at Evelyn's house. They saw them gardening together, shopping together, and leaving town for errands that took hours. Still, no one questioned it openly. In Cedar Falls Ridge, family closeness was respected, and assumptions stayed unspoken. The unusual slowly became normal, protected by the town's quiet nature. Marissa's presence continued to fade within her own life. She felt excluded, but could not explain why. When she tried to assert herself, the response was subtle resistance rather than open defiance. Decisions had already been made. Plans had already been set. The shift left her feeling unsure of her place, but she blamed herself rather than those around her. Evelyn justified everything internally. She believed she was protecting her family, preserving stability, and preventing collapse. Lucas accepted her reasoning without challenge. Together, they formed a partnership rooted in secrecy. The emotional boundaries that once existed disappeared completely, replaced by a connection that should never have formed. By the time Marissa sensed something was deeply wrong, the bond between her mother and husband had grown too strong to undo easily. What began as support had evolved into a dangerous closeness. The family stood at a silent turning point, unaware that the path ahead would lead toward irreversible consequences and a truth too dark to remain hidden forever. Marissa's unease grew slowly, like a quiet echo that never left her thoughts. She began to notice patterns she had once ignored. Lucas returned home later than expected, often distracted and distant. His attention seemed elsewhere, his responses brief and careless. When Marissa asked simple questions, she sensed hesitation rather than honesty. The home no longer felt like a place of comfort, but a space filled with unanswered tension. Evelyn's presence became heavier. She appeared more frequently without invitation, moving through the house as if it were her own. She reorganized spaces, corrected routines, and offered advice that felt more like judgment. Marissa felt watched rather than supported. The authority Evelyn held over Lucas was obvious now. He rarely challenged her suggestions, even when they conflicted with Marissa's wishes. The shift left Marissa isolated within her own marriage. Attempts to reconnect with Lucas failed. Their conversations stayed shallow, focused on tasks instead of emotions. When Marissa tried to address the distance between them, Lucas withdrew further. He avoided eye contact and dismissed concerns as stress or exhaustion. Marissa began questioning her instincts. She wondered if her long work hours were the cause, if she had failed as a wife. Doubt replaced confidence, weakening her ability to confront the growing imbalance. The isolation affected her deeply. She spent more time alone, avoiding conflict and convincing herself that patience would restore balance. The silence between her and Lucas grew heavier with each passing day. Evelyn remained calm and composed, showing no signs of discomfort. Her control was subtle, expressed through decisions made without discussion and routines adjusted without consent. Small signs of exclusion multiplied. Family plans were discussed without Marissa present. Financial matters were settled behind closed doors. Lucas no longer shared concerns with her. The emotional distance became impossible to ignore. Yet Marissa felt trapped by loyalty and fear. She could not imagine confronting her own mother or accusing her husband without proof. The thought of disrupting the family structure filled her with guilt. The house reflected her emotional state. Rooms felt colder, meals quieter, and time slower. Marissa found herself staying longer at work, using exhaustion as an excuse to avoid the discomfort waiting at home. She began keeping thoughts to herself, afraid that speaking them aloud would make them real. Her world shrank, limited to routine and obligation. Evelyn watched this transformation without interference. To her, Marissa's withdrawal simplified matters. Lucas leaned on her more heavily, seeking reassurance and direction. The dynamic solidified, leaving no space for Marissa's voice. What had once been a family unit turned into an unbalanced structure controlled by influence rather than trust. By the time Marissa fully recognized the extent of her isolation, she was already surrounded by silence. The absence of support left her vulnerable and unsure. The growing tension remained unspoken, but it shaped every moment. The family stood on the edge of collapse, unaware that the pressure building beneath the surface would soon explode into irreversible tragedy. The night it happened arrived without warning, wrapped in cold air and heavy stillness. Snow covered the streets of Cedar Falls Ridge, muting sound and movement. Marissa returned home later than usual after a long shift, her body exhausted and her mind restless. The house was unusually quiet. Lights were on, but something felt wrong in a way she could not immediately explain. The familiar comfort of routine was missing, replaced by a tense emptiness. Inside, signs of disturbance slowly became clear. Objects were out of place, and the air felt charged, as if something had already happened and left its mark behind. Marissa had recently reached a point of clarity about her life. She had begun to understand that the distance in her marriage was not accidental and that the closeness between Lucas and Evelyn was not harmless. That realization weighed heavily on her that night. It gave her a sense of urgency she had not felt before. What unfolded next was never fully witnessed, only reconstructed through evidence. Investigators later believed that Marissa confronted the truth she had been avoiding. Financial documents and personal notes found afterward suggested she was preparing to make changes. She had considered leaving the marriage and reclaiming control over her life. That decision, once formed, shifted everything. The balance that had held the family in quiet dysfunction was suddenly threatened. Sometime during the night, violence broke the silence. The struggle was brief but intense. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of an outside intruder. Everything pointed inward, toward the people she trusted most. When emergency responders arrived, they found Marissa lifeless on the kitchen floor. The scene was chaotic but contained, suggesting panic rather than randomness. The house that once symbolized stability became a crime scene. News traveled fast in Cedar Falls Ridge. Police cars, flashing lights, and quiet officers filled the street. Neighbors gathered at a distance, confused and frightened. No one expected such darkness to emerge from a home they passed daily. Lucas was present, visibly shaken but composed. Evelyn arrived shortly after, controlled and calm. Their reactions raised no immediate alarms, but subtle details lingered in the minds of investigators. The town entered a state of disbelief. Marissa was known as kind and hardworking, someone who rarely caused trouble. The idea that her life ended violently inside her own home felt unreal. Authorities quickly ruled out robbery or random attack. The focus narrowed to those closest to her. The calm town atmosphere was replaced by tension and unanswered questions. That night marked the end of normalcy for everyone involved. What had been hidden behind routine and silence was now exposed under harsh investigation lights. The quiet bond that had grown in secrecy could no longer remain unseen. Marissa's death was not just a loss, but a rupture that forced truth into the open. The story that followed would reveal how unchecked control, dependence, and forbidden attachment could turn ordinary lives into something tragic beyond repair. The investigation moved quickly, driven by the unusual nature of the crime. Detectives found no signs that a stranger had entered the house. Doors and windows were locked, and nothing of value was missing. This immediately shifted attention toward Marissa's personal life. Investigators began by examining routines, relationships, and recent changes. What first appeared to be a tragic domestic incident soon revealed layers of hidden behavior. Financial records became a major focus. Bank statements showed accounts Marissa did not regularly use. Some transactions linked directly to Evelyn and Lucas, including shared withdrawals and transfers made without Marissa's knowledge. These findings suggested secrecy rather than cooperation. Investigators noted that financial pressure often exposed deeper motives, and in this case, money appeared to be one of several connecting threads. Surveillance footage from nearby stores and traffic cameras added more clarity. Both Evelyn and Lucas were placed near the home around the estimated time of death. Their movements overlapped in ways that contradicted initial timelines. While neither had openly lied, details were missing. The gaps in their accounts raised concern. Detectives recognized patterns of coordination rather than coincidence. The emotional history of the household became clearer as investigators spoke to co-workers, neighbors, and extended family. Many described Marissa as withdrawn in recent months. Some recalled her expressing confusion and stress, though she never directly accused anyone. Others mentioned Evelyn's strong influence and Lucas's growing dependence. These observations formed a picture of imbalance and control. Forensic evidence supported the theory of intent. The struggle showed signs of resistance, suggesting Marissa fought back. The nature of the injuries indicated close contact rather than an accident. Experts concluded that the event unfolded rapidly but was not spontaneous. Planning was involved, even if the final act was rushed. This finding changed the direction of the case entirely. Digital evidence added another layer. Messages and emails revealed Marissa had been researching legal options and housing alternatives. She was preparing for change. Investigators believed she had discovered the truth shortly before her death. That discovery likely triggered fear and desperation in those trying to keep their secrets hidden. As evidence accumulated, the investigation narrowed. Detectives recognized that the crime was not driven by anger alone, but by the threat of exposure. The emotional bond between Evelyn and Lucas, once dismissed as family closeness, now appeared as a shared motive. Control, dependence, and fear had merged into something dangerous. By the end of the investigation phase, the case no longer centered on mystery, but on confirmation. Every detail pointed inward. The quiet image of a supportive family collapsed under evidence. What remained was a carefully constructed lie undone by facts. The truth, once buried beneath routine and silence, had surfaced fully, leaving no room for doubt about what truly happened inside that house. As the case moved closer to resolution, investigators focused on reconstructing the final days before Marissa's death. What emerged was a timeline filled with warning signs that only made sense in hindsight. Marissa had grown more alert and decisive during that period. Her behavior at work shifted. Co-workers noticed she was asking about time off, legal resources, and temporary housing. These were not random questions. They pointed to a woman preparing to step away from a life that no longer felt safe or honest. The most damaging discovery came from Marissa's private records. Notes stored on her phone and laptop revealed that she had begun documenting unusual behavior. She tracked financial inconsistencies, unexplained absences, and moments where decisions were made without her involvement. The pattern was clear. She was no longer confused. She was certain something was wrong. Investigators believed she had reached the truth shortly before her death. This realization changed everything. The emotional bond between Evelyn and Lucas was no longer a suspicion, but a central motive. Their relationship was built on secrecy and control, sustained only as long as Marissa remained unaware. Exposure meant loss of influence for Evelyn and loss of security for Lucas. The stability they had created depended entirely on Marissa's silence. Once that silence broke, panic followed. Forensic experts concluded that the murder was not the result of sudden rage. It was the outcome of fear of being exposed, fear of losing control, and fear of consequences. The planning was minimal but deliberate. Investigators believed the intention was to stop confrontation permanently, not to escape justice. This distinction mattered. It showed that the act was driven by desperation rather than impulse. Further analysis revealed coordinated behavior after the crime. Movements, communication gaps, and shared decisions suggested collaboration. Neither acted alone. The bond that had formed between them functioned as a unit under pressure. What once felt like emotional closeness had transformed into mutual dependence in the face of danger. This shared responsibility sealed their fate. The case files painted a chilling picture. A woman seeking independence became a threat to those who benefited from her absence. The very people who should have protected her instead saw her awareness as a risk. The forbidden attachment between Evelyn and Lucas did not resemble love as commonly understood. It was rooted in power, validation, and control, not affection. By the time prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the outcome was unavoidable. The truth was no longer hidden behind assumptions or appearances. Every piece aligned with one conclusion. Marissa's attempt to reclaim her life triggered the very act that ended it. The revelation was not just shocking, but deeply unsettling. It showed how quietly boundaries could be erased and how fear could turn familiarity into something lethal. The story reached its most disturbing point not with the crime itself, but with the understanding of why it happened. Love that should never exist had grown unchecked, and when faced with truth, it chose destruction over exposure. The courtroom was tense the day the trial began. Cedar Falls Ridge had never witnessed anything like this before, and the entire town seemed to follow every development. Newspapers, local television, and neighbors all waited for answers, desperate to understand how a quiet family could become the center of such a horrifying crime. The house that had once been ordinary, almost comforting in its routine, was now a symbol of betrayal and tragedy. Lucas and Evelyn were both present, sitting side by side yet visibly strained. The courtroom revealed them in a new light, no longer the careful, polite figures seen around town, but as adults accountable for actions that destroyed a life. Prosecutors presented financial records, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence in painstaking detail. Each piece painted a picture of planning, secrecy, and a dangerous bond. Marissa's private notes and communications were read aloud, showing her growing awareness and intentions to reclaim control over her life. The evidence was undeniable, and the room held a heavy stillness as the story unfolded. Witnesses described Marissa as a dedicated, compassionate woman who had quietly suffered in her marriage. Neighbors and co-workers recounted small moments that at the time seemed insignificant missed appointments, late nights, subtle withdrawals. In retrospect, they were clear warnings of escalating tension. Experts testified on the psychological dynamics, explaining how Evelyn's controlling nature and Lucas's dependence created an environment ripe for manipulation. The court began to understand that the forbidden bond had not only existed, but had grown unchecked into something lethal. The prosecution made a compelling argument. They described how Marissa's independence had threatened the carefully balanced system Evelyn and Lucas had built. Her intention to assert herself triggered a desperate response from two people who felt cornered. Each act, from financial secrecy to shared deception, became evidence of motive and premeditation. The defense attempted to minimize the relationships and downplay planning, but the layers of corroborated evidence left little room for doubt. What had been hidden behind appearances for months was now exposed completely. Verdict day brought silence before the final announcement. The jury had deliberated over the evidence and testimony, weighing every detail. When the decision came, both Lucas and Evelyn were found guilty of murder. Sentences were severe, life imprisonment without parole, reflecting the seriousness of their betrayal and the loss of an innocent life. Cedar Falls Ridge, still struggling to process the events, finally saw justice served, though the emotional scars remained. In the aftermath, the town grappled with the lessons of the tragedy. Families whispered about boundaries and trust. People reflected on appearances versus reality. Marissa's death became a symbol of caution, how control, secrecy, and emotional dependence can turn familiar lives into dangerous territory. The community's innocence had been shattered, replaced by a sober awareness of the complexities hidden behind polite smiles. The Hart-Morena household was left empty, a physical reminder of what had been lost. The story, once silent and hidden, now served as a warning. Love without boundaries, when mixed with control and dependence, can escalate into destruction. Cedar Falls Ridge slowly returned to routine, but the memory of Marissa's life and her tragic end lingered, a haunting testament to the consequences of forbidden attachment and the fragility of trust within a family.